You're exhausted, but nothing's wrong. You're showing up, checking the boxes, doing everything right. But something deep inside you is quietly breaking, and no one can see it. You smile at work, you answer messages, you keep moving, but at night, or in the silence between tasks, the truth creeps in. This isn't burnout. This isn't a rough patch. This is something older, something deeper. Carl Jung knew that feeling, but for him it didn't arrive as restlessness, it came as a vision. He saw Europe drowning in blood, cities under crimson water, corpses drifting past churches, and the war hadn't even begun. He wasn't asleep, he wasn't dreaming. He was awake, and no one believed him. They said he was unraveling, slipping into madness. But then the world followed. World War I exploded, just as he had seen it in his mind. This wasn't prophecy. It wasn't imagination. It was the unconscious breaking through. Jung had opened a door most people never touch, and what he saw on the other side changed him forever. He wrote, "The years when I was pursuing the inner images were the most important in my life. Everything else is to be derived from this." He didn't try to explain them. He didn't suppress them. He left his career, his reputation, his certainty, and turned inward. Not for answers, for truth, because what looked like a breakdown was a breakthrough in disguise. And if you've been feeling like something in you is fading, if life no longer fits the way it used to, maybe you're not falling apart. Maybe something false is falling away. You don't need a diagnosis. You need a descent, not into chaos, but into contact. Because the thing trying to rise in you doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be heard. Carl Jung didn't heal by thinking harder. He healed by listening deeper. Every morning he sat alone with a journal, letting his mind open to whatever the unconscious had to say. Not concepts, images, a winged figure named Philemon, a serpent eating its own tail, a divine child, mandalas and sacred circles that poured through him like dreams etched in ink. He wasn't creating them, he was recording them. And what emerged was the Red Book, a vivid, hand-illustrated descent into his own soul. He called the process active imagination, not daydreaming, not theorizing, but a conversation with the unconscious, a surrender to what lives beneath the surface. He wrote, "I stood helpless before an alien world. Everything in it was strange and incomprehensible." This wasn't metaphysics, it was survival. Jung wasn't looking to solve the unconscious. He was trying to survive the fact that it had taken over his life. And what it showed him wasn't insanity. It was a mirror. The unconscious doesn't care about your resume, your self-image, your carefully managed personality. It speaks in metaphor, in fatigue that no amount of sleep fixes, in emotional weight that no to-do list can lift, in a low hum of sorrow that creeps in when you stop distracting yourself. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But what happens when avoidance fails? When the life you've built starts to feel too small for what's rising inside you, that's when the shadow arrives and the descent begins, not as punishment, as invitation. The invitation to stop pretending you're fine, to stop performing wholeness and start building it, to meet the parts of yourself you had to abandon just to be accepted." Jung wasn't trying to be better, he was trying to become real. And that journey didn't begin with progress, it began with surrender, with letting go of the belief that your sadness is a flaw, that your confusion is failure, that your darkness makes you broken, because it doesn't. It makes you human. And underneath it, waiting, is a voice that doesn't want to be healed, it wants to be heard. You're not exhausted because you've done too much. Carl Jung didn't heal by thinking harder. You're exhausted because of everything you've never allowed yourself to feel, the rage that you swallowed, the grief you postponed, the voice inside you whispering, "This isn't who I really am." Carl Jung called it the shadow, not darkness in the moral sense, but everything you've repressed, denied, or disowned just to be acceptable. He said, The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared. It starts early. You learn which parts of you are lovable and which must be hidden. You adjust, you edit, you perform, and at first it works until it doesn't. Because the parts of you that were silenced didn't disappear. They waited. And when they return, they don't whisper. They crash through your routines. They interrupt your relationships. They speak through burnout, detachment, and that slow, haunting numbness you can't explain. You catch yourself staring at your phone for hours, waiting for something to make you feel again. You laugh in conversations, then wonder why it felt rehearsed. You go through the motions, but everything feels one layer removed. This isn't weakness, it's the soul rising up against a life that can no longer hold it. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And yet, when the shadow appears, it's not there to harm you, it's there to show you the cost of not being whole. The shadow isn't the enemy, the lie you're still trying to live is, and the only way forward is through the part of you that stopped dreaming, through the pain you intellectualized, through the hunger you medicated, through the grief that never found a voice. Because until you face what's been pushed down, you will always feel off balance, like your life is happening adjacent to you. You won't feel broken. You'll feel disconnected, detached from something sacred. That disconnection is the signal. You are not lost. You're being summoned, not back to who you were, but down into the parts of you that were never allowed to live. The shadow isn't asking for dominance, it's asking for a seat at the table. And when you give it that, you don't become darker, you become whole. The descent doesn't want to save you. It wants to dismantle every version of you that was built to survive. Carl Jung called it the night sea journey. A collapse of the ego that strips away everything you thought defined you. And it doesn't feel like growth, it feels like death. The death of your image, the death of your narrative, the death of the voice in your head saying, just hold it together a little longer, but that voice has gone quiet and now you're here floating in the in-between, too far from who you were, not yet close to who you're becoming. This is the point where most people panic. They scramble for fixes, life hacks, coping mechanisms, escape routes disguised as solutions, but Jung didn't run. He went deeper. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, not because pain is noble, but because consciousness costs the illusion, and that illusion is everything you built on top of silence, the job you pursued to prove your worth, the identity you protected to avoid rejection, the image you curated so no one would see the parts of you still bleeding. All of that burns in the descent. And what's left? Something honest, something unpolished, something sacred." Jung didn't return from the underworld enlightened. He came back with ink-stained hands, a stack of visions, and no desire to be who he used to be. He understood what we've forgotten. You don't rise by force, you rise by surrender. Inanna knew it too. The Sumerian goddess descended into the underworld. She passed through 7 gates. At each gate something was taken. Her crown, her jewels, her robes, her status, her protection, her control, until she stood naked before the Queen of Death. And only then did she die, not as punishment, as preparation, because death isn't the end of the story. It's the part no one talks about before the return, and the return doesn't bring back the old self. It brings back a self forged in silence, the kind of self that no longer performs for approval, the kind of self that has nothing left to prove, the kind of self that walks through life not seeking validation, but bringing presence. So, if your descent has begun, if you're watching your old life fall apart in slow motion, don't rush to rebuild. Let it fall, because the person you're becoming doesn't live in what's collapsing. They're waiting beneath it. You don't come out of the fire enlightened. You come out unrecognizable, because the fire doesn't care about your potential. It cares about your truth. Carl Jung knew this. He didn't walk away from the unconscious with answers. He walked away with ashes. ashes of the self he had spent decades constructing, ashes of the persona that once earned him applause. And from those ashes, he began again. He built a stone tower by the lake, not to show the world he had healed, but to hold what had survived the burning, a structure that made no claim except this. Something sacred was lost here, and something sacred was found. Jung saw psychological transformation as a kind of alchemy, nigredo, the blackening, the phase where everything breaks down before anything new can emerge. He wrote, "The gold is not found in the light, it is found in the dark. The gold is in what remains when the fire is done with you, not in the success story, not in the image, not in the rebound, but in the part of you that couldn't be burned because it was never false to begin with. That's what this fire is doing. It's not here to fix you. It's here to finish what the lies started, to destroy what you had to become in order to survive. The smile you forced, the resilience you wore like armor, the version of you that got you this far, but cannot take you any further. You keep saying you're tired, but maybe you're not tired. Maybe you're grieving the self you never got to be, and the one who wasn't afraid to speak, the one who wasn't afraid to want, the one who wasn't afraid to need. That self is still in there, not broken, buried. And this one, it's your chance to dig, not to rebuild your life from who you were, but to build something for who you actually are. So stop asking when it ends. Start asking what it's burning away, because when it's over, you won't return as the same person. You'll return as someone who doesn't need to. Jung didn't return with solutions, he returned with silence. Not the kind that avoids pain, but the kind that has walked through it and no longer fears it. He wrote, "The self is not something one finds, it is something one becomes. And that becoming, it costs everything that isn't real. You don't bounce back, you dissolve." And what reforms is quieter, slower, and impossibly more alive. Not because it's confident, because it doesn't perform. You stop selling yourself. You stop proving your worth. You stop apologizing for existing in ways that make other people uncomfortable. You don't want attention anymore. You want truth. That's what individuation is, not transcendence. Integration. The moment when the broken parts stop begging to be fixed and start being seen. The moment when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What was I never allowed to feel?" Because that question changes everything. That question brings you back. Back to the grief you didn't mourn. Back to the joy you didn't trust. Back to the hunger you silenced just to fit in. And when you return, you won't need to be loud. Your presence will say what your persona never could. You'll speak with fewer words, but people will feel you more. Because now, you're rooted. Not in who you're supposed to be, but in who you've always been, before the world convinced you otherwise. And that root, that's what survives the descent. Not your status, not your clarity, not your explanation. Your presence, that's the light. The kind of light that doesn't come from above, it comes from underneath. From the part of you that made it through the burning. From the truth you now carry, not as knowledge, but as memory. So if this reached something in you, don't move on like it didn't. Sit with it like this. Share it with someone whose silence feels like your own. Subscribe, but not because you need another video, but because you're done pretending you don't feel this. Someone you love is still in the fire, and maybe your courage to sit in the dark, to name what no one else will, is the reminder they've been waiting for. You are not broken, you are becoming. And the light they're searching for? It's already in them, it's already in you, waiting, burning, becoming.